It says going live. It says going live. Am I live? It looks like I'm live. Hello. Hi, everyone. I guess we've gotten started. Um, just a quick sound check. Can someone type whether you can hear me or not? Because I've plugged everything in yet another different way that I haven't tried before. And of course, there's a 10-second delay between what you type and when I see it on the screen here. So loud and clear. Okay, great. Thank you, Matt. Okay, well, let's get started. Thank you, everyone, for coming. This is our third or fourth live stream that we do just for premium members. So obviously, the most important thing to start off with is thank you so much for being a premium member. You're not used to seeing me with glasses, are you? Glasses good, glasses bad. I don't know. I don't know. We wouldn't be here if it wasn't for all of you guys who support us by being premium members. And every time we talk to the premium members and ask why you support Skeptoid Media, it's not because you want these live streams or you want not even because you want premium access to the podcast, but because you believe that critical thinking is important and you want to support projects like this that bring it to a larger audience and make it, hopefully, eventually make it more mainstream. So really the people who are premium members, which is all of you, are people who are altruistic and they want to help other people be able to make better life decisions by making understanding critical thinking better and better, which is, of course, we're all on board with the same thing. So I thank you for being my partners in this work that's not only important, but it's kind of a lot of fun. Um, I hope you guys have as much fun listening to each week's podcast as I do writing and researching and recording it. Not editing so much. That's work. But I want to start off with plus you and Skeptoid are awesome. Thank you very much, Matt. Emory says B&H. What is B&H? I don't know what that is. Do not represent the opinions of Brian Dunning and Emory. In case some of you don't recognize Emory, who's here on the live chat, he is the director of Science Friction, the film project that is consuming altogether too much of my time these days, and that I think is probably going to be the biggest splash that we've ever made worldwide, bringing critical thinking, scientific skepticism, et cetera, to the masses. If you're not aware of that project, check it out at sciencefriction.tv. It's a full-length documentary film. It's going to have ideally a theatrical release, but at minimum a cable release. And we're retaining educational rights because we're going to also create educational materials and give it for free to schools. That's the kind of thing that you guys are all supporting by being our premium members here. Emory says, thanks to me. Yes, Emory is working his Butinsky off as the director. Definitely an unfair proportion of the load of making the film is landing on his shoulders. Thank you, Emory. And in front of all these friends who are listening now, thank you very much. You're awesome. I love you, man. Okay. I love you, man. If this is another time, I would tell the drunken I love you, man story I had with Adam Savage at DragonCon a few years ago. But anyway, moving on. I want to start with a couple of announcements here. We have two new people on the team that I would like to introduce to all of you, although I can't really introduce them because they're not here or anything, but just in name. We have a new director of corporate sponsorship, corporate underwriting. Our director of corporate underwriting is Katrina Smith. She is someone who has worked for a long time in the nonprofit scene here in Bend, Oregon, where our headquarters are located. She is fantastic, and her main job is going to be bringing in corporate underwriters, basically who sponsor episodes. Some of you may or may not know, so I'll explain. Most podcasts run advertisements, and Skeptoid has run its share of advertisements. But when you're a nonprofit, and I realize many of our people joining us today are from Australia, and I don't know how it's different in Australia versus how it is in the United States, but when you're a nonprofit, the Internal Revenue Service, basically the government's tax department, has specific rules for what kind of income you can receive. And advertising income, you're really not supposed to take. You can get it, but you have to pay a huge penalty on it. So we try not to run ads on the show. And the difference between an advertisement and a sponsored message is that the advertiser is receiving some sort of a material benefit, like, hey, we're having a sale, come to us, whatever. Or they want me, the host, to say, hey, I use this mattress and it's fantastic, so you should buy it too. That's an example of them receiving a material benefit. Now, corporate underwriting is what you would hear on, in the US, it would be NPR podcasts. In the Australia, I'm not sure. Um, I'm not sure how ABC relates to NPR. Another subject for another time. But basically, we can give a message like this episode received sponsorship from the Bob and Jim Foundation, whatever it is. So we're not really giving them a direct material benefit as a result of mentioning their message, but we can say a few lines about what they do. Um, so it's important for us to get corporate underwriting as opposed to advertising. That makes it much more difficult for Skeptoid to survive in the ecosystem that's developing around podcasting than it is for most for-profit podcasts, or even a hobby podcast that someone runs that they use a service that inserts ads into the show. We can't do that. Um, we're fortunate. One of our underwriters is Amazon Web Services, which grants us bandwidth for hosting the media files. Now, as many of you know, Skeptoid's a fairly large podcast. It has a hell of a lot of downloads, takes up a tremendous amount of bandwidth, and that would be prohibitively expensive if we had to pay for it. So Amazon is one of our most valuable um, uh, corporate underwriters. So we appreciate that very much, and you'll probably see a little banner for them or something if you click on the website. Um, Anyway, so that's Katrina. Katrina is in charge of getting corporate underwriting for podcast episodes, and she is awesome. And you can see her little picture and her profile and everything on our staff page at skeptoid.org. Skeptoid.org is the website for the company. Skeptoid.com is the website for the Skeptoid podcast. Don't be confused by that, please. Um, the other introduction I want to make is John Sifling. John Sifling is our newest member of our board of directors, and he is also going to be stepping into the role of treasurer. And he has fairly extensive experience in being a nonprofit treasurer, so we're super stoked to have him. He's an awesome dude. I'm actually going to meet him in person for the first time. Um, I don't know where he's located. I'm just realizing that. I don't know where John's located. But I'm going to meet him at the first time at SciCon in Las Vegas, which is where we're going to be holding the first private screening for Science Friction. You can get in on that if you go to sciencefriction.tv. There's a link where you can sign up. If you have donated to the film, or if you are going to be attending SciCon in Las Vegas, then you can make it. You can come and see the screening for free. The screening has been also underwritten by one of our donors, Mr. Dan Murphy, and he's going to be in attendance there as well and say a few words. So anyway, thank you, John Sifling. Being the treasurer for nonprofit is a huge pain. He has to do a whole bunch of paperwork every quarter when we have our board meetings. He has to go through all the financial statements and everything and do the comparisons year over year, make sure everything looks legitimate. And then he makes a report to the board of directors. And then the board of directors comes to me and says, well, here's what we think. So I'm told, I just got a text message from Linda, who is our director, our special gifts officer, juggling all these titles. Linda says that John Sifling lives in Pasadena, California. Now that you say that, I remember that. So thank you. So anyway, looking forward to meeting John in person. Okay, so one of the let me look at your comments here really quick. Run my eye down the list, see if there's anything that could use an immediate reply. Bloop, doop, doop. Your shirt says "Eat lots of fish." Why? Oh, it does. This shirt was not deliberately worn for this event. It just happens to be what I had on. This is a favorite restaurant of mine, the Crab Cooker in Newport Beach, where I grew up. It's actually older than me. I think it was born a year before I was born, like 1960 something. I've been going there my entire life. I love it. Um, that's the answer to that question. Who decided B&H is who Google decided should have ads placed here? Are there ads? Are you guys actually seeing ads on this broadcast? I don't see them on my end, but I probably have a different interface. Um, I I wasn't aware of that. I don't have no idea who B&H is. Hopefully there's somebody good. um, Anthony B, thank you very much. Donated $200. I'm not sure if that was to Science Friction or to the company in general, but that's awesome of you. Thank you so much, Anthony. Katrina is a natural force to be reckoned with. That's a joke from Emory, comparing Katrina, our person's name, to Katrina the storm, I assume. That's, I struggle to comprehend jokes. The ABC is prohibited from any ads or sponsorship. Now, okay, that's interesting. So, ABC, for our American listeners, is Australia's public broadcasting agency, Australia Broadcasting Corporation, or something close to that. Um, so, yeah, I didn't realize that. No ads or sponsorship. I guess they get their funding completely from the government, or do they ever run like pledge breaks for people to donate? I don't know. I'm not sure. ABC is fully badly government funded, says Darren. Okay, there's our answer to that. Matt asks, is that different from promotional consideration that you hear sometimes on game shows? That's a good question. I don't know. A game show is probably something that's for profit and doesn't have to worry about the same restrictions that we do. So I honestly don't know the answer to that. Okay. Brandon asks for the shout outs. Can I use my company name instead of my own? So a little while ago, I should have done this 10 years ago, but I didn't start doing it till a few months ago. I started doing shout outs in the podcast, which probably most of you have heard. At the end of the show, uh, I think 4 recent um, donors who support the show financially get a shout out. And if you do that, if you haven't done it, you can go into the members portal, skeptoid.com/members, and there's a screen in there where you can request a shout out. And then it just kind of randomly selects 4 people who haven't gotten a shout out each week, and spits those out to me, and they go on the reading script for each show. Here's an example of one, and they get a shout out. So you're asking for the shout outs, can I use my company name instead of my own? So I'm happy to say whatever you want me to say. I don't care what it is, really. And you've probably heard some people have written pretty goofy things in there. We just don't want to tread on making it sound like it's a commercial message. So um, happy to say your company name, thanks to you, yeah, thanks to your company for being a supporter, but we wouldn't want to put something that sounds like a commercial message in there. That's just being strict and following the rules that we're expected to follow. When are you going to play that keyboard for us? Asks Reed. Um, I'm not hooked up to anything right now. You hear me play that every week on the show. What are you talking about? Yeah, all that little musical underbeds and everything is all stuff that I do. I'm a terrible musician. I make no pretense about it. This is just my little gift to myself that I do these. Um, okay, so let's get to your questions. Um, if you read the email completely and thoroughly announcing this live stream, which I know you all did because we all read every sentence of every email that's sent to us, you saw that you can reply to it and ask me a question. So I've got, I don't know, half a dozen or so here. Is it a standalone keyboard or a MIDI controller? It's just a USB MIDI controller. It's just a cheap, um, M audio keyboard that just plugs into the system here. And I edit in Final Cut Pro, so I can also do, or not Final Cut, Logic Pro. So I also do the music editing in that. Okay, first question. One thing I always wanted to know is how do you organize your research for podcasts? This comes from listener Rubim. Rubim. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Thank you. What are your main standard sources? How do you manage the links and other content sources? Is there any tool that you recommend? This is a great question. It's actually one that I've kind of gone around and around with over the years. I have looked at various software tools for organizing a writing project. Um, there's examples of programs like that that are for novelists, some that are for screenwriters, um, and frankly, none of them have ever really been worth the extra hassle to me. So honestly, I just have I'm on Mac equipment here, so I use Pages for all of my writing, and I just have a document for every. Is there a way that I can show my screen on this? There may or may not be. I don't know. I'll look into that. Um, I just have a folder for all the episodes that I'm working on with a document in each one, and anytime someone sends me a suggestion, they'll usually throw a link or two. That all gets just copied and pasted into the document, and then as I'm writing and researching, um, I'm kind of gradually deleting links and resources that I have already used and pasting in new ones that I find. And kind of by the end of the time the work's done, I'm left with an episode script and no more notes left on there. So I don't. It's not a super organized process. It's just kind of what grows organically out of how I work. Here's a question on the stream from Harry. Do you ever get depressed at how much mushy thinking there is out there to make episodes about? Um, I mean, the obvious answer is yes, but I've been doing this for so long now, and I always say I've heard it all, but no, I haven't because every day I hear something new. Um, Depressed, it's there's definitely an undercurrent of depression throughout the whole process of making the Skeptoid podcast. But but no, I mean you kind of develop a thick skin, and I'm sitting here very much consciously thinking positively and what's the solution and how can we make people understand this better and what can we put out there that'll be a useful resource. So I try to focus on that rather than letting it get to me. Um, Glenn is saying there's no buffering, presumably on this transmission. He's at the airport using 5G. Oh, 5G. Very impressive. I don't get 5G. Um, Sorry about that. Couple people saying buffering is a problem. I don't think there's anything I can do about that. I'm sorry. Close the blind on the window, says someone. It is closed. You know, anything I do is going to make it worse. The problem is there's like this last one is this it's like at an angle that's reflecting the sun just exactly wrong. Is that well, anyway, moving on. Next question comes from listener Jordan. Hello, Jordan. Thank you. And this is more of an episode suggestion. It says, I suppose this isn't a specific question for a live chat, but I would love to hear you tackle stretching as a means to reduce the likelihood of athletic injury. As someone who discovered a love of running after turning 40, I find myself prone to regular injuries. The information I've seen on stretching before versus after exercise and dynamic versus static seems to be all over the place and often sounds an awful lot like pseudoscience. Might as well throw in something on compression sleeves while you're at it. Thank you for all you do. Thank you for the question, Jordan. I have not done an episode on this. I have not researched it, so I would not presume to speak intelligently on it right now. I can, as we all know how important anecdotal accounts are, I will give you my own anecdotal account. Um, Many of you know that I have much of my life played high-level competitive volleyball. I was playing in a AAA league for a long time in Southern California before I moved to Oregon. And the worst injury that I ever heard of in volleyball, of course, happened to me. Um, I was going up to block, and which means you're jumping basically straight up and you come straight down. And if you ever watch volleyball on TV during the Olympics, you'll often see them mopping the floor. Guys will come out and mop the sweat off the floor. That's for a very, very good reason because I landed in a pool of sweat. My foot slid forward, the rest of the leg came straight down, my knee went backwards. It was the most horrific thing that's ever happened in the history of the planet Earth. And I screamed and screamed and screamed for like 20 minutes. Um, would stretching have helped that? I don't know because I was going to say it was the ACL that went, but it was actually the ACL, LCL, MCL, popliteus, and the head of the tibia. that kind of all went simultaneously. It was a horrific thing. I found that after some of my surgeries, I would ice before playing, and people would often go horrified, saying, "No, no, don't ice before your play. That's going to tense up the ligaments. It's going to like freeze it and shrink it and make it brittle, and it'll snap when you start using it." That's never been my experience, and I've always personally, anecdotally, found better relief when icing before using an injured or beat up joint. So this is a great episode suggestion. I have collected some notes on this before. They're in a folder someplace, so I will add this to it and hopefully get around to it. So thank you, Jordan. That's a great question. Brandon Lee, I played volleyball down at Big Corona most weekends in the late 80s and early 90s. You're a Newport boy. Did you ever play there? I played at Newport a lot at Big Corona on the courts. Sounds like you played on the old courts when there was, I believe, 8 of them lined up in front of the parking lot and a couple over by the jetty. Um, I played a lot in those days too, but let's see, that was early 90s is when I started playing. Early 90s, I would play. I would never play on the top court because those guys were all assholes. I would probably start at about court 4, and courts 4 to 8 is where you would have found me, probably starting around 93, 94 through early 2000s, something like that. So anyway, yeah, it's entirely possible that we were on the same beach at the same time. That's awesome, Brandon. Thank you for letting me know. Matt asks, how did you get drawn to skepticism originally, or to put it in comic book terms, what's your origin story? Um, the comic book term doesn't help me, but drawn to skepticism originally, I think most of us would say that we've just always naturally been kind of skeptical slash cynical. I was probably more cynical than skeptical for most of my youthful existence. Um, as many of us, I was thrilled reading Bigfoot and ghost and UFO books through my whole childhood and everything. Believed every word of it when I was young, and then just get fascinated with finding the solutions to these. I think that's a pretty common story because virtually any time I hear one of my colleagues answering the same question, they give basically the same story. Emery says, I think the benefits of stretching has been well documented in sports medicine. No doubt about that. I have also heard, and again, I have not researched this, so I will not speak authoritatively, but I have heard people say within the last decade probably that, it turns out it's kind of like flossing. It actually does not produce better outcomes. No reason not to do it, but it's not producing better outcomes. Linda asks, how long does an episode take for writing and research? Well, it's a weekly show, so obviously the average is 1 week of work per each show. I'm generally working on 1.4 episodes at a time, focusing on one and throwing notes on one or two others as I go. If I have a special inclination to work on one particular episode, I'll work wherever I'm most motivated so I can be the most productive. And I like to be at least 2, 3, ideally 4 episodes ahead. Since we started working on science friction, I haven't been. I've been 0, 1, or 2 episodes ahead. So I'm kind of always a bit rushed to make sure that we've got shows that are ready to go. They're uploaded, they're in the can, they're ready to go live when their publication date comes, because I might get hit by a bus. And if I'm in the hospital for 3 weeks, we want the show to continue uninterrupted. So that's important to be ahead. Donation question. What is the better, credit card or personal check? Do the credit card companies take a big cut? Great question. And people ask me this all the time. We get basically most of our donations come from 3 sources. Number 1 is credit card. Number 2 is PayPal. Number 3 is checks that people send in. Obviously, checks, we pay 0 commission on it. So checks are great. They're just a little bit of a hassle to donate. So we kind of pay a commission in time. PayPal is the most expensive. PayPal is also the least reliable. PayPal constantly does things like it shuts off people's recurring donations without telling anyone and without giving any reason. And it's the most expensive. We do get nonprofit pricing from PayPal, so it's better than than normal. But for the credit cards are what we prefer the most because for most credit card donations, we actually pay zero commission. We use Stripe, which is the same credit card processor that Patreon uses and most of the big internet merchants use. We have the same level account that all of them do. And because we're a nonprofit, we actually pay quite a bit less in commissions than most of them. As I say, in many cases, zero commission. So if anyone's asking and you're wondering what's the best way to donate, go for your credit card. It's most secure, it's easiest, and it's cheapest. Most of your money comes to us. It doesn't go through a middleman who takes a cut. Okay, let's get to this next question from Bill Turchinets. Bill, I've seen your name coming by many, many times over the years. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing it correctly, but doesn't look like I can go that far off. But anyway, hi, Bill. Thanks for sending this. Bill's question is, have you ever read about the high concentration of UFO sightings in southern Manitoba? It seems there have been an unusually high number. Could be too much booze. Um, I okay, interesting point. I have not heard about anything special in southern Manitoba. So that's an interesting question. If there is, uh, email me something on it. If there's an article written about that or something, that's something I'd very much be interested in taking a look at. Uh, but what grabbed my attention in this is could be too much booze. Well, often people mention booze as the explanation for someone making a weird report, uh, especially if you read a lot of the UFO old books on UFOs, old books on Bigfoot. There'll always be a quote from some sheriff or something who says, "Yeah, I think the alcohol may have been involved here." Wink, wink. Um, now, if you're as frustrated by that as I am, it's because alcohol is not a hallucinogen. Alcohol does not produce hallucinations. It kind of generally people in pop culture tend to think of it that way until you sit down and say, "Wait, do you get hallucinations when you get really drunk?" No, no, nobody does. That's not part of how alcohol works. It's not LSD. It's not mushrooms. So that's um, that's a terrible skeptical response to a weird story, saying that someone must have been drinking, because it just doesn't add up. Uh, Linda's sending me a couple of more messages. Linda's awesome. She's always reminding me of things that I'm supposed to be talking about. Number one at the top of the list, of course, what everyone's been hearing about is the Area 51. Let's all go storm Area 51. They can't stop all of us, and we'll find the aliens who are secretly there, which is supposed to happen on September 20th. Um, I don't think, I don't think it's not going to be a million people showing up, but I bet you anything that there are going to be some small, manageable number of yahoos who show up on September 20th and try to do that. So we're kind of keeping our eye on that to see what happens, what transpires. Um, and one thing we're definitely looking to do is to go on radio programs and talk about it, especially as the date gets closer, and tell people what to expect, what's actually going to happen, what's actually there, how we know what's actually there, how we know what Area 51's real history is, how we know that Bob Lazar is a crackpot who never had remotely anything to do with Area 51. Um, and again, I have my own anecdotal report. I have an anecdote for all occasions that in uh, August of 2001, right before September 11th, two buddies and I jumped in a Cessna Skyhawk and we flew to Area 51. We did we drove there the night before. We rented a Explorer, Ford Explorer or something, and we drove there. You drove to the famous black mailbox that's out on public land, and then we followed the dirt road that goes into Area 51, the kind of the main road that trucks and stuff will take when they go there, and had our own little adventure, which we can talk about some other time with the security guards there. But then the next day, we went back to the airport, got in our plane, and flew around. Now, right before September 11th, um, the MOA, Military Operating Area, which is the area that excludes civilian planes, where if you're general aviation, you can't go in there. It was much smaller. It's kind of like a blocky shape, like this 90-degree angles. And so we pretty much flew right outside that perimeter. We had a nice GPS screen in the plane, so we were able to do that. And at that time, we were close enough, you could get close enough in those days, that you had an excellent view of not only the whole Groom Lake complex, but also Papoose Lake, which is where Bob Lazar, once it became clear that he never actually worked at Area 51, he then made up, Area S3 is where I actually worked. That's why nobody remembers me, uh, and which he said was located at Papoose Lake. Well, we have a perfectly clear vision of Papoose Lake, and it's just as you see it on Google Earth. There's nothing at all there. It's kind of ridiculous. Uh, so anyway, we've got some good stories that we want to talk about on radio. So if any of you have any local radio stations that you're in touch with, as September 20th gets closer, uh, we would be thrilled if you'd recommend that they have me on to come and talk about what's going to happen when the people show up there, because I've got personal experience and also my research to support that. So that's kind of fun. And you can just email me, brian@skeptoid.com, if you have anything. Linda also asked me to mention monthly giving. Yes, these are not completely free. Did you think this was free? You weren't very skeptical. You have to listen to our sales pitch, which is that we do depend on your donations. And the best thing in the world is to set up something that's monthly recurring. We'd rather have recurring monthly micropayments than one big annual payment. And the reason for that is just our ability to manage and understand our cash flow, because we do have employees on payroll and obligations that have to be met. And the better that we're able to do that as a very small nonprofit operating business, the better for us and the better for you, because it stabilizes our economy, basically. So please consider setting up monthly micropayments if you don't already. Thank you very much. That's awesome. Okay, let me run my eye down the list here. Dr. Carl, oh God, that's a great idea. Dr. Carl, for those of you who are not in Australia, is like the most famous and trustworthy guy in Australia. He's Carl Sagan and Bill Nye and Neil deGrasse Tyson all rolled into one. He's on the radio every single day. He's had TV series throughout the last, 125 years or something. He's very much beloved in Australia, and he happens to be an incredibly super nice guy and has been a big supporter of mine since day one. And I just couldn't love him more. He's awesome. So yes, I will absolutely get a hold of Dr. Carl and ask if he wants to talk about Area 51 on Triple J Radio as that September 20th day gets closer. Don't forget Dr. Carl's shirts. You can't forget Dr. Carl's shirts. He wears crazy shirts. His wife makes them all. I got to meet his wife and his daughters. They're just the loveliest family. So Area 51 memes? I don't know. Oh, Glenn, this is a great point, Glenn. Have you had a response from Neil deGrasse Tyson's tweet on the size of ancient tides at all? Yesterday, Neil deGrasse Tyson tweeted that in the early days of the Earth and the Moon, when the moon was so much closer and orbiting so much faster, tides were 8,000 times higher than they are today. And this was something that I had had in my episode folder forever and ever and ever, and never really found any research on it, because I wanted to talk about, like, God, that's incredible. That's the most insane thing I've ever heard. If that's true, more people need to know about that. So I finally sat down and did the episode and found that it's true, but not true. There was never ocean tides that were appreciably higher than there are today. There was certainly that much tidal force on the planet Earth that you could have had tides that high. But at that time, the Earth was just solid liquid magma. And many of you may have heard the episode I did just a couple of weeks on this called Prehistoric Supersonic Monster Tides. It was fascinating. And I replied to Neil's tweet and I retweeted it with my same reply. I never know who sees replies to tweets or who sees repeat. I'm just, I'm groping in the dark trying to use Twitter here. So that generated quite a lot of threads, a lot of people asking questions and pinging back and forth. But no, I did not get any direct response from Neil himself, although that would be like the most awesome thing that ever happened. because his tweet was, I guess, scientifically in error. But much more interesting that because it's right, because there was that much tidal force, but it's wrong because there wasn't liquid water yet. And the reasons why really tell a crazy, awesome story. Very surprising. If you have any interest in orbital mechanics, great way to start any conversation. If you have any interest in orbital mechanics, you'll love this episode. Or just planetary physics or anything like that, or just amazing things in the history of Earth's development. It was a crazy, crazy episode to research. And I was super fortunate because there's very few geophysicists who work on this. And a couple of them, one in particular, were corresponding with me directly through the whole time I was writing and researching it. So I got literally the best, absolute state of the art information on this subject from arguably the leading publishing scientist on the topic from the last quarter century or so. So here's a question from Justin. Is this the same Justin or a different Justin? Didn't we already? Oh, we had a Jordan. Justin says, it seems like I've been hearing a lot lately about how a lot of forensic science isn't really based on science. Have you thought about doing an episode about the scientific credibility of forensics? Of forensic science? Absolutely, yes. And you're right. That has come up a lot. Things like, you watch one of these detective shows, and there's always the guy who's the blood spatter expert. There's blood spattered on the wall. That means the killer was Bob, and he was standing here. And it turns out that that's probably little better than water divining or throwing up the chicken bones in the air. So yes, I definitely have that in my episode list, but I have not done it yet. Have not thoroughly researched it, so I wouldn't speak about it yet. But even though I clearly just did, it's a great idea for an episode, and I will get to it. Here's one from Pete. Pete says, SpaceX has launched the first 60 of what is to be a mesh of some 12,000 satellites. Two questions. How will this completed mesh impact ground-based optical and microwave astronomical observations and the ability of future space missions, manned and otherwise, crewed and otherwise, to navigate through the cloud of objects? Now, when I think I got this yesterday, and when I did, I said, "Oh, that's awesome! I gotta research that before we go on the live stream." And I didn't get a chance to do that. So I will tell you the questions that I had, if that gives you any insight. Is where are these 12,000 satellites going to be? Are they going to be geosynchronous? Are they going to be high Earth orbit, low Earth orbit? What is their spacing out? Do you call it their azimuth? If they're equatorial or if they're polar orbit, what angle they're at. All those things make a big difference and have a big impact on all of those questions. So yeah, those are great questions. There are answers to that are easily discoverable. I just haven't done it yet. That's a very cool subject. I remember that is it Iridium or is it the company that took over Iridium? They're launching 10 satellites at a time on SpaceX rockets, which to me was surprising. It's like a communication satellite is a non-trivial piece of hardware, and to stack 10 of them into a single nose cone of a rocket to launch it, but that's what they do, and they're just launching them just as fast as they can. And that was kind of fun. I got a reply tweet from the CEO of Iridium when that happened. I said, "Gee, isn't 10 a lot?" And he said, "10 seems just like the perfect number to me." Pretty cool guy to do that. Anyway, that's the extent of the printed out questions that people emailed. I will run my eye down here, down the list of questions again here. Too much booze. I don't know the context of that, but guilty as charged. DragonCon. No, I'm not going to be going to DragonCon this year. DragonCon is it's expensive and it's more fun than it is a responsible business expense. So it's hard to justify unless there's a really good argument in favor of going. And the skeptic room that they have going there has seemed to me to be getting just smaller and smaller each year, and angled more toward atheist activism than toward science and skeptical thinking. So it's kind of been less of a value add for us to go. And since it's really expensive, I mean, I'll keep going, but it's going to be every 2 or 3 years. It's not going to be every year. Let's see. Our local radio stations here in Denver have been having psychics talking to the dead on their morning show or discussing UFOs. Yeah, actually, was it this morning, or it was either this morning or yesterday morning? Ben Radford, uh, deputy editor of Skeptical Inquirer, and a good friend of mine, so he's a cool guy, lives in New Mexico. He was on one of these radio stations just before they had the psychic on. They were going to have a medium who claimed to talk to your dead relatives, and somehow they decided to actually get a skeptic on to get the skeptical perspective first, which is awesome. So I listened to Ben do his thing. I didn't have time to sit and listen to the psychic coming on, but you just know that the hosts were going to, at some point in the conversation, we're going to confront the medium with, well, Ben Radford says you're just doing hot readings or cold readings. How do you answer that? So really, when you can get a skeptic onto one of these radio stations, ideally before the guest comes on, the medium, the psychic, whoever it is, that's great outreach. It helps the hosts nail the con artist with the right questions. So I hope that was a win. I didn't get a chance to listen to it, but yeah. Skeptic's Guide to the Universe addressed the satellite issue a few weeks ago. Okay, there's a great answer. So if anyone's interested in learning more about that, tune in to SGU. My new pickup line. Hey, do you have any interest in orbital mechanics? Yeah, I guess I kind of stepped in that one. Because I'm caught in your gravitational field. Wow, that's next level, Emery. Okay. Okay. It looks like we're kind of running out of questions for me. So let me look at what Linda's been throwing at me here, see if I've got any other announcements to make here. Uh, oh, just recently we did a Skype meeting to a new skeptics group in back in the East Coast somewhere. Uh, Triangle Skeptics. I forget where they were. Um, they're just a new group. They had like 5 people in some little back room at a pub, and they obviously can't afford to bring in speakers, flying them in or something like that. And so they just had me Skype in to attract new members and to get something, a little video that they could share, and something that they can. Um, Ideally, you tell your little local town newspaper that you're having this, celebrity skeptic or something Skyping in. Maybe it gets some newspaper coverage, which we have successfully seen in the past. It doesn't always happen, but there are opportunities like that to get the word out to a bigger audience. So that's something I'm always happy to do, and we can usually do that at no charge. To have me Skype into your group or something like that. Um, Emery asks if I'm wearing pants. Last time I talked to Emery on the phone, he was clearly on something. I think we have the same situation today. Clive, comment on Jeffrey Epstein, the creeper guy. No, I don't. I mean, that's politics and everything. That's so far outside of what I do here. Um, yeah, I mean, obviously, I'm not a fan of the people who are the targets of the Me Too movement and all of that, but that's kind of just outside of the scope of Skeptoid. Um, can't solve all the world's problems, so we just try and focus on giving people the tools to separate science from pseudoscience. So an important subject. It's just not my focus. Um, Declination. Paul Hansen suggests for the angle at which a satellite orbits the Earth. It's so funny because I did that episode on um, the Phantom satellite, Zuma, the Phantom satellite, and man, I read and learned everything there is to know about satellite orbits, and now I've spaced on like the most basic term. Get it? Spaced on the most basic term, but that happens. It's hard to keep all the information from all these episodes every week for 13 years in my head. It's like I just very limited memory space. I keep putting in one of these little flashcards every so often, but still I forget things. Oh, we are also doing a thing in about a month. Our local college campus here, OSU Cascades, Oregon State University, Cascades campus, they have a summer camp for students who are going into various programs. There you have 3 separate tracks, and one of them is the STEM track. And these kids are going to be stuck in a room for a week, and one of each of 3 days, they have some expert come in and do basically be their instructor for that day. So I'm going to do one day for the STEM track here at OSU Cascades, and I'm going to be basically doing a combination of several of my live shows, including Your Brain Sucks, which is the most popular and fun one. That's the one in which we make everyone in the room's brain fail at least once and usually multiple times. And it's hilarious and it's a ton of fun. So we're going to do that to these incoming college students. So that's another opportunity. If you work at a college or if you've got a local one that does anything like that, keep in mind that that's the kind of thing that's why we exist as a nonprofit, so that we can provide a speaker and instructor to go to things like that. So keep it in mind if you have any such opportunities. Darren asks, how many potential episodes currently in the folder? I purged this the other day, so it's going to be less. There are right now 92, but I also discovered an old folder, and that one has, it's right here, that one has 336. So that's 7 years of episodes in that folder right there. Oh my gosh. And just running my eye down the list, I haven't done any of those. Oh, this is crazy. I need 6 other podcasts and 12 other hosts. Okay, well, I think we're just about ready to wrap it up here. Thank you guys all so much for tuning in. And thank you for the reason you're tuned in, which is being one of our premium supporters. It's super valuable. It's super important. We try to do one of these about every 2 months, and I'm trying to alternate them time-wise for basically our listeners are the English-speaking countries. So we've got going from west to east, we've got Australia, New Zealand, we've got United States, Canada, and then we've got UK and Europe. So I'm trying to do one that's optimized time-wise for US, UK, and then one that's optimized for US, Australia. This is the US, Australia one. Happy Sunday morning. This is your church for everyone in Australia. It's our Saturday evening. Hopefully not cutting too far into your date night for people in the US. So that's what we're trying to do with these. And we're always open to suggestions on how to make them better, even if you want to have guests on that I talk to. So always send us your ideas or suggestions. Brian@skeptoid.com is the easiest way to reach us. We're also going to do something fun this year because this October is the 13th anniversary of the Skeptoid podcast. So we are going to do some kind of a fun sort of pledge event around the 13th anniversary, 13 being a fun superstitious number, obviously. So keep your eyes and ears open for that. You'll be seeing stuff about it in the newsletter, hearing it on the podcast. That's going to be fun. So I think that's about all. Thank you. You're welcome. Thank you. You're welcome. Okay. Well, I guess we will sign off. Go get your lunch if you're in Australia, and go join your date who's been waiting for you at the table if you're in the US. Good night, everyone. Thank you very much. Wonderful to be here with you. It's a great special treat for me. I hope you enjoyed it as well. So, good night.